Hey guys, welcome back to my channel Sociology with Mahima. In this video, we will cover the topic epistemology, which is a part of Unit 5 of IGNOU MSO-002. So let's get started. Let's understand what epistemology actually means. The term epistemology has its roots in Greek. It comes from two words, episteme, which means knowledge, and logos, which means study or theory. So when we combine them, epistemology literally translates to the study or theory of knowledge. In philosophy and in social science research, epistemology tries to answer some very fundamental questions. How do we know what we know? What makes something true knowledge? On what basis do we say that our knowledge is valid? Essentially, epistemology is concerned with understanding the nature, sources, scope, and limits of knowledge. It looks at where our knowledge comes from. It also examines how that knowledge is justified, meaning how we can be sure that what we claim to know is actually reliable or true. In the context of social science research, epistemology becomes especially important because it helps researchers decide what counts as valid knowledge about society and human behavior. So, in simple terms, epistemology forms the foundation of all research. It guides us on how to think about knowledge, how to collect it, how to justify it, and how to distinguish truth from belief. Without epistemology, researchers would have no clear direction or philosophical grounding. Let's now understand why epistemology is so important in social science research. Epistemology is not just a theoretical concept, it actually shapes the entire way we conduct research. It influences what we see as knowledge, how we collect data, and how we interpret social reality. First, it determines what we consider to be knowledge. Then, epistemology decides how we collect data. And finally, epistemology affects how we interpret reality. For instance, a positivist researcher believes that knowledge comes from observation and measurement, just like in natural sciences. They think reality exists independently of human perception and it can be studied objectively, while an interpretivist, on the other hand, believes that knowledge comes from the understanding the meanings people attach to their actions. They see reality as socially constructed, meaning it exists through human experiences and interactions. Therefore, your epistemological position becomes the foundation of your entire research approach. It influences your research question, your methods, your analysis, and even how you present your findings. Major epistemological traditions in social science. Let's talk about positivism, which is one of the most influential epistemological traditions in social science and was developed by Auguste Comte, often known as the father of sociology. Positivism is based on the idea that social reality can be studied scientifically, just like the natural sciences. According to positivism, knowledge is considered valid only when it is based on empirical evidence. That means something that can be observed, measured, and verified. So, in this tradition, objectivity is extremely important. The researcher should keep their personal feelings and values aside and focus only on observable facts. The process is quite systematic. First, you make objective observations, then derive facts. From those facts, you identify laws or patterns, and ultimately, you can predict future outcomes. This is the hallmark of scientific reasoning applied to society. Some of the key features of positivism include maintaining objectivity, meaning research should be neutral and unbiased, using quantification and measurement, because numbers and data provide precision, studying cause and effects relationships, like how one social variable influences another, conducting value-free research where the researcher's personal opinions or morals should not interfere with the study. However, positivism has also faced criticism. Many scholars argue that this approach ignores the meanings, emotions, and subjective experiences of people. Society isn't just a collection of measurable facts. It's full of human feelings, beliefs, and interpretations. By focusing only on observable data, positivism often oversimplifies social reality and misses its depth and complexity. Now let's discuss interpretivism, also known as anti-positivism. This approach emerged as a reaction against positivism, which treated society like a machine that could be measured and studied purely through scientific methods. Interpretivist thinkers argue that society is not just made up of observable behaviors. It's made up of meanings, emotions, and shared understanding that people create through interaction. The key idea in interpretivism is that social reality is constructed, not discovered. In other words, we don't just find social facts, we create them through our daily relationships, communications, and shared beliefs. To truly understand society, we have to understand how people make sense of their world. This perspective is closely associated with thinkers like Max Weber. Weber introduced the concept of Verstehen, which means understanding. Interpretivism believes that human actions cannot be understood merely through observations or numbers. They must be interpreted within their social and cultural context. That's why this approach often uses qualitative methods like interviews, case studies, and participant observation. These methods allow the researcher to immerse themselves in the social setting and grasp the deeper meanings behind people's action. Another key point is that, unlike positivists who insist on objectivity, interpretivists see the researcher as a participant in the process. The researcher's role isn't detached or neutral. Instead, they become part of the social world they are studying. Their insights, empathy, and interaction help uncover the subjective experiences of others. Now let's move to critical theory, one of the most influential epistemological perspectives in modern social science. Critical theory originated from the Frankfurt School in Germany during the early to mid 20th century with thinkers like Max Horkheimer, Theodor Adorno, Herbert Marcuse, and later Jürgen Habermas. These scholars were deeply concerned with how society, culture, and knowledge are shaped by systems of power, ideology, and domination. Critical theorists argue that knowledge is never neutral. Unlike positivists who believe in objective value-free knowledge, critical theorists maintain that every form of knowledge is produced within a particular social and political context. The goal of critical theory is not just to understand society but to change it. It takes a normative and emancipatory stance, meaning it aims to free people from oppression, false consciousness, and domination. Critical research questions whose interests are being served by current systems and seeks to expose hidden power relations behind social institutions like education, media, and politics. Critical theory also emphasizes the role of the researchers as self-reflexive. This means researchers must constantly reflect on their own position, biases, and involvement in the research process. They acknowledge that they are not detached observers but active participants in a social and political world. Now let's talk about feminist epistemology. Feminist epistemology emerged as a critique of the traditional male-dominated ways of understanding knowledge. Traditional epistemology, especially under positivist influence, has been dominated by male perspectives. It tends to ignore or undervalue women's experiences, emotions, and voices in the creation of knowledge. Feminist thinkers argue that this creates a partial and biased understanding of reality because it excludes half of humanity's perspective. So, feminist epistemology challenges the idea that knowledge can be completely objective or detached. A major contribution of feminist theory is the concept of standpoint epistemology. It means that knowledge is situated, what we know and how we know depends on our social position. Feminist scholars argue that those who experience marginalization often have a clearer, more critical understanding of how social systems work because they see both the dominant and the oppressed sides. Feminist scholars argue that real personal experiences are valuable sources of knowledge. They believe theory should not come only from abstract reasoning or statistics but also from people's daily lived realities. Traditional science often claims to be objective, assuming the researcher should be detached and emotionless. Feminist epistemology disagrees. It says subjectivity can actually enhance understanding because it allows empathy, reflexivity, and honesty about one's own position. Researchers should be aware of their own biases, not pretend to have none. Intersectionality means that oppressions overlap. Gender is not the only factor shaping a person's experience. A woman's reality is also affected by her race, class, caste, sexuality, and ability. Feminist epistemology sees research not as an exercise in collecting data, but as a tool for empowerment and social change. It encourages participatory research methods where women or marginalized groups are not treated as subjects but as partners in knowledge creation. Now let's talk about our final epistemological tradition, which is postmodern and poststructuralist epistemology. Postmodernism rejects the idea that there is one universal truth or grand theory, like Marxism, functionalism, or positivism, that can explain everything in society. Instead, it says reality is made up of multiple perspectives. Different people, cultures, and groups have their own truths. Post-structuralists, especially Michel Foucault, emphasize that knowledge and power are deeply connected. He introduced the concept of power/knowledge, meaning that those in power creates the dominant truths of society. Thus, knowledge is not simply found, it is constructed within systems of power through schools, media, religion, science, and even language. Instead of one dominant truth, postmodern epistemology believes in a plurality of truths, many small local and contextual truths. Different communities have different ways of knowing and understanding the world. This approach promotes openness, diversity, and tolerance toward different viewpoints. Postmodernists are highly skeptical of the claim that researchers can be objective or neutral. They argue that every researcher brings their own background, language, and cultural lens. Even the choice of research topics, methods, or interpretation reflects values and assumptions. So, instead of pretending to be neutral, postmodern researchers acknowledge their position and biases and examine how knowledge is produced, who produces it, and for whose benefit. That's all for today's video. Here are some questions which have come into the exams in previous years. Thank you for joining the class. See you in the next video.